In chapter 2, you learned that markets are efficient most of the time. There is some need for government to intervene, however, if there are externalities present. So, what are externalities? Well, externalities are situations where uh, instead of a buyer and a seller being involved in a transaction, a third party also gets involved. In that situation, it's important that the government intervenes and restores the efficiency in the market. In chapter 4, again, you come up with that concept of externality, and here we are talking about the role for government. There are different roles for government in a society, and one role is to reallocate resources in presence of externalities. So let's discuss the concept of externality in some depth. Normally, in case of any transaction, in case of any market transaction, there are two parties involved. There is the buyer and there is the seller. In presence of externality, on top of the buyer and the seller being involved in the exchange, a third party gets impacted by the exchange even though they are really not any part of market transaction. So let's give an example of an externality. Let's first pick an example of negative externality, because externalities can be either positive externality or negative externality. So let's talk about the negative externality first. Let's suppose there is a chemical firm C that produces fertilizers, and it sells the fertilizers to all farmers that are located in this area. So there is a market for fertilizer, and the chemical firm sells fertilizers, and these are the demanders for fertilizers. The demanders are the farmers. So these are the two parties involved in the market transaction. However, the chemical firm, while it is producing the fertilizer, it dumps certain toxic waste that comes out of the production process into a river that flows next to it. And the river carries the toxic waste down, and there is a small fisherman that is there. So I'm denoting that by F. And the fisherman has a small fishing farm here, and the toxic waste is coming and killing the fish. So even though the fisherman is not part of the transaction in this marketplace where fertilizers are being bought and sold, the fisherman is still getting impacted by this market of fertilizer. That's a negative externality. The fisherman is the third party, and this is a great example of negative externality. Now, what can the government do in this situation? Well, the government can either regulate the chemical farm and say that the chemical farm cannot put toxic waste into the water, or it has to refine the toxic waste in certain ways, or it has to dispose it off in certain ways. In any of these cases, the cost will go up for the chemical farm. The government can also impose a tax, and it can say that the chemical farm has to pay a per unit tax. In that case also, the cost of producing fertilizer will go up. Okay? So how is this situation of externality corrected by government intervention? Well, if there is no government intervention, then the cost to the chemical farm will be very low. And because the cost is low, because the farm is not taking into account the cost of disposing of the chemical waste in certain ways, the farm overproduces. So in presence of negative externality, farms overproduce, and the government needs to intervene so that that overproduction can be cut down. So anytime you put a tax, you can cut down on the production, because if this is the market, this is the market demand, this is the market supply for fertilizers, then once the government put tax, the supply curve actually shifts to the left, and as a result production goes down, the amount bought and sold in the market goes down, and the price of the fertilizer goes up. That's how the government corrects negative externality in the market.